Welcome to another episode of Conversations with McNab. In this episode, we have two conversations that happened within St Michael's. The first is with Sir Lloyd Geering. At the time of the interview, which was in 2011, Sir Lloyd was 92 years old. An incredible energy, the type of energy that a lot of 30-year-olds are lacking, and something that I personally look forward to trying to achieve when I am that age. So much life and intellect and wisdom rolled into one. During the conversation, Dr. McNab and Sir Lloyd Geering talk about Sir Lloyd Geering's work with Ecclesiastes, which Ecclesiastes wrote 2,300 years ago, and Sir Lloyd Geering has an existential argument with him in this book, and it's very interesting, some of the points that he raises from this. Another very interesting part of the conversation has to do with Christianity without God. It seems like a weird thing to say in the beginning. How do you have Christianity without God? How do you have any religion without God? I think anything that I add to that would just not really cut it. They talk about it very well, and it's fascinating to hear, and that's in the middle part of the show. The second conversation is with Jenny Cheng. Jenny Cheng I have had a bit to do with since being at St Michael's. She was a winner of the St Michael's Medallion for her work with the Boroondara Support Group. Now the fascinating part about the support group for me is that Jenny started it after she had her own stroke, and it was a very bad stroke. During her recovery, she realised that there was nothing in Melbourne for stroke victims, no place to go to where stroke victims could discuss what they'd been through and go on a journey together with people around them who are supporting them, hence the support group. People that, if you had a stroke, you'd want other people there who have had a stroke to say, hey, I'm doing okay, how are you doing? That's only part of the work that she does. Again, another person full of life, another person full of energy, and it does come out in these conversations. I don't have much more to add to that. Really, it's better to listen to the words coming straight from the horse's mouth. So, I'll see you next time.
This young fella is 92 years of age. Isn't that right? 92.
Yeah, that's right, 92, yes.
92. He had to think for a moment. He's written many books, and I just had a couple today. But in one of the books called Such is Life, who said that? Do you remember who said that? Ned Kelly, yes. Such is Life. He has an interview with Ecclesiastes. How old would Ecclesiastes be if he were alive today?
2,300 years, I should think.
2,300 years he lived, and he was a great source of wisdom. Well, you had a conversation with Ecclesiastes, and he talked about things being determined ahead, that things will happen, and you challenged him on that. So is our life determined?
No, it's not determined. A lot of things are determined. I mean, we can't choose our parents to begin with. And then we can't choose the culture we're brought up in. We're brought up in a culture, and before we realize it, we are already growing into mature persons. So a lot of things are given, but within those givens, we have a certain amount of choice. And life, really, is what we choose to make it. So I am not a determinist, and I tried to persuade Ecclesiastes he wasn't either. In fact, Ecclesiastes from time to time talks about chance. And indeed, if he had the word luck, he would have talked about luck, because the word fortune simply means luck, really. So what I have found, and indeed Ecclesiastes agrees with me, is that many of the most important things that happen to us just happen by chance. And some people, of course, have a lot of bad luck in life. I've happened to have been a person who've had a lot of good luck in life. I did nothing to deserve it. I did nothing to deserve to become what I've become. But what's important for all of us is to use what chances come to us to the best advantage, not just for ourselves, but for all those around us. And that is living a fulfilled life.
Many of you might connect with us when I tell you that Ecclesiastes is a book in your Old Testament, and you'd know the section at least where it says there's a time to live and a time to die, a time to gather stones and a time to... You remember the piece that we hear it often? So that's who we're talking about just for a moment. He also said, Ecclesiastes also said, have a good time, didn't he?
Yes. When you read Ecclesiastes, he can often sound a bit pessimistic, because he will say from time to time, well, nothing's really worthwhile. Nothing. I've lived a long life, he says, and I've got nothing to show for it, and I'll certainly not be able to take anything with me.
In fact,
but then from time to time he says, now the very best thing you can do is to eat and then drink and enjoy life as you go along.
He did have a say, everything is emptiness, didn't he?
Yes, oh yes. Well, most people know that by the words of the opening, vanity, vanity, all is vanity. But that's not a very good translation, because it didn't mean vanity in the way we use vanity. The word that's used there in the Hebrew refers to the breath that comes out of your mouth on a frosty morning. And lo and behold, it disappears before your very eyes. And what he was saying there are so many things in life that are just like that. They don't last very long at all. And it is in this context of perpetual change that we are thrown into life, and we have to make the best of it for ourselves and for others.
So in the other book, Christianity Without God, Christianity Without God. How can you have Christianity without God?
Well, it seems absurd, doesn't it?
It does.
Yes, but then when you come to think about it, you have to ask, what do you really mean by God? And when we ask that question, we find all of us have very different ideas about God. I've often done this with a group of 30 or 40. Write down in one sentence what you believe about God. And no two answers are ever the same. Because God is a symbolic word, and it's a word which for me really means all that is important about the world and about life. It's a symbol of all the great values. That's why even the New Testament said God is love, and God is truth, and God is honesty. But the way in which our tradition has usually put it is, they give you the impression that God somehow is a supernatural being in the sky. And that's, in our day and age, that's a very misleading idea to have. No, God is really the highest values which call us forward to respond to.
Some of us want to ask you the question, where the young people or older people, where do they get those values from? Because we in our age were told these values came from our belief system, all those beliefs that we tick off for our religion. But if we don't have that, as you and I now espouse, where do people get those values of compassion, of love, of goodness, of beauty?
We get them from our culture. And that is why in non-Christian cultures, they're getting values. And we are finding that many of the values which we, for example, espouse are the same values you'll have in other cultures too. Take a Buddhist culture, for example. Compassion is one of the great values which they set before people and which should be, of course, responded to in one way or another. And we're coming to realize that the values that we regard as of supreme importance come out of our very humanity. They are human values. They are values which we have, in the course of our long history, have slowly recognized as the very best that humans can actually aspire to.
But we are very slow to take that on, aren't we?
Very slow, yes.
We still want to go back. I say regress perhaps, but that might be too harsh a judgment. We still want to hold on to this God person, don't we? How can we let that God person go and still feel the importance of those things that matter?
Yes, people often find it difficult to let go things which have been like that of importance. But if you're wanting to let go of the idea of God up there, hold on to the God you find in one another. God is in us. And this is something I've learned a great deal from Martin Buber, a Jew, who taught us to enter into the deepest relationships with one another, which he called I, thou, in which when you speak to a person, listen carefully to what they say. Respond to them as they learn to respond to you. In this I-thou relationship, he wanted to say, that's where we find the divine presence.
Well, it's interesting that you've mentioned Martin Buber because he's one of my icons, as most people here would know, and Martin Heidegger as well. You would not be surprised if I also mentioned Paul Tillich, would you?
Certainly not.
And so Paul Tillich said, faith is the total act of the human personality. It is an act of the total personality.
That's right.
What would you say about that?
Well, I think, you see, one of the troubles is that people tend to think that faith is believing certain things. And when you can't believe them, you still have to believe what you ain't true. Now, that's absurd, really. Faith is the response of the whole person to reality initially. And we learn this from the very beginning. That's why Jesus could hold up a little child as a very example of faith. Because as children, we are born with an instinct for faith. And that's why we cling to our mother's breast. And then we cling to our parents as we're growing up. And then gradually we learn to stand on our own feet with faith in reality, faith in the world, faith in our values. And as we respond, that is what faith is.
How long are you going to live?
How long
are you going to live?
I don't know.
How long would you like to live?
Well, I would like to live as long as I can while I'm still healthy. But I suspect I may reach a point where, in fact, to live longer would be worse than not living at all. When life takes on a negative value instead of a positive value. That's why, you see, I'm in favour of dying a good death. Or what's the word they call it?
Dying with dignity.
Yes, dying with dignity, but there's another word that you use for that.
Euthanasia, you mean?
Euthanasia. And what does euthanasia mean? It simply means dying a good death. That's all it means. So I think after living one's life, one hopes that one may be able to also die a good death. Unfortunately, because of the decaying process of the human body, that's not always as easy to achieve as one would like it to be. And indeed, some diseases, such as Alzheimer's disease, takes away even your personal identity. And that's very sad for all the people around, as well, of course, for the person who has been disappearing in that. But if we can live to the full, no matter whether it is short or whether it is long and then live and then die well, that is the ideal.
Isn't that terrific? Christianity without God, Christian faith at the crossroads. We're going to hear a bit more about that soon, I think. And there's another book that you've written, and I've read. I think I've lent it to someone. God to Gaia. What is that? The latest?
Oh yes, it's coming back to Earth.
Yes, coming back.
Yes, and that's a collection of things which I've written over the last 10 years. And my editor, a friend I have in Rhode Island, in the States, he sent me an email and said, I had a brilliant idea in the middle of the night. He said, I find looking over your work that it forms a unity. I think we should get it published. And because of that, so it goes from something that I'll give you a little bit of later on this morning, and right through is Christianity going anywhere, it says. Then the greening of Christianity, the need for Christianity to direct all its energies to the great problems we have today, looking after the earth. And finally, valuing the secular world in which we live, ending up with a reference to Gaia, which of course is the Campbell, I've forgotten his name there, a scientist's idea that even the earth itself and life on it is like a living organism of which we are a part.
That's good. So, welcome.
Thank you.
Very.
Yes, I'm very honored to be here, Dr. McNabb, Dr. Campbell, and the Church Council of St. Michael's for inviting me.
You had a stroke how many years ago?
I had a stroke 18 years ago, a brain hemorrhage.
Yeah. And what did that do to you at the time, physically?
There's the thing about stroke, it's so sudden that you have no time to prepare. So 1 minute I was healthy, working, and enjoying myself. And the next thing I know, I was flat on my back, half paralyzed, immobile, and wondering what's happening to me. It just no time to prepare.
No earlier indications, it just happened.
Well, if I look back, of course, I can see a little bit of indications here and there. I always have headaches when I was young. And blood pressure was okay. And because you're young, you eat whatever you like. So there might be a bit of diet problem, a bit of stress.
Oh, that's very normal though, isn't it?
Yes,
I have
you
that
just
too.
don't take it.
We all have that. So all of a sudden this happens, and clearly you have moved a great deal since that first day.
Yes, after service today, in the Waratah room, I'll be giving a story about how I cope with it. And what happened, I started the Boroondara Stroke Support Group. And after that, life goes on, and it's getting more and more things to do.
Tell us about the Boroondara Stroke Support Group. Tell us all about that.
After 9 years in the wilderness, so to speak, I decided I want to reconnect with the community. So I look around for a stroke support group to join, but there was none. In a city of Boroondara with 150,000 population, there isn't a stroke support group at that time. There may be one before, but then I decided to form one because I was really keen to find out how other stroke support groups are doing and how other stroke survivors are getting on with their lives.
In a city like Boroondara, 150,000 people, you say,
yeah.
Then, how many would you expect have had a stroke of that number?
What about 2,700?
2,700
less than
of people in Boroondara alone.
That's right, alone.
Yes. And in terms of stroke, the occurrence of stroke in the wider community, what is the frequency of stroke, from a minor stroke, if you can ever say a stroke is minor, to the major knockout strokes? What is the frequency or the incidence?
In Australia, we get statistics all the time. Stroke in Australia is the second largest killer.
Killer.
Yeah, it's the killer, that's right. And
So we need to know
60,000 people will be affected by stroke each year.
Each year.
And that works out to be about 10 minutes. Someone in Australia will be affected by stroke,
Yes.
which is really a gruesome statistics.
So 60,000.
In 2009, that's the latest.
How many of those people will die?
Well,
Approximately?
approximately about half of that.
That's a huge.
So, yes.
That's a huge number, isn't it? And the majority of the others will be somewhat
Permanently disabled.
permanently disabled.
Yes, like me.
But if I can say a but, you've clearly done something to cope with that catastrophe.
I think I've gone through the stages of grief, and finally, when you're in the final stage of acceptance, that's when you move on in life. You're suddenly free from all this sadness and frustrations and anger. But that is the most beautiful stage. And when you have accepted that life must go on, and I had started a stroke support group, I just feel very passionate about what I'm doing and persevere on. And last month we celebrated our 9th birthday of the group.
What do you do? What does the group do to be such a good support? 9 years of it, that's good.
Yes.
What do they do?
Well, we became a platform to advocate for the rights of stroke survivors. That's one of the many things. But daily and weekly, we have programs because the whole aim is to have quality of life, not just surviving. And I started a lot of programs. We have woodwork for stroke survivors. We have gym for stroke survivors. Everything is for stroke survivors.
And you have bowls?
And we have lawn bowls every Monday. And one of my committee members has actually in the front here, Brian, he runs the lawn bowls. And he's very good at that too.
And at one stage, weren't you going dancing?
We have ballroom dancing, but all of us are getting a bit older, and it's getting quite difficult to be twirling around the floor. Although you see on television, they did acrobatic acts when you're younger.
Are you going to do Dancing with the Stars, are you?
Well, not quite. We're seeing stars sometimes when we turn around too often. Yes.
So, people generally, what do we need to know from your experience? I know that you'll be talking more about it later, but what do we really need to know about stroke?
I think actually stroke is unfortunately a global epidemic now, and I will give you figures about that. 15 million people in the world is affected by stroke, of which 6 million will die of stroke. And a further 5 million will have permanent disability. Now, it's really gruesome. That's why the World Stroke Organization is emailing everybody throughout the world that has an interest in the World Stroke Organization. And I got an email the other day to please spread the news that stroke is preventable, stroke is treatable. And there are many things you can do when you have a stroke, and there are many things you can do to reduce your chance of getting a stroke.
So preventable,
preventable,
treatable, and also productive in terms of doing some productive life.
And that's what I'll be speaking on in the Waratah room today.
So I hope you'll all, or as many of you as can, will squeeze in with us and come and hear Jenny Cheng speak in Waratah after coffee today.
And it only takes six simple steps to minimize Yeah.
Don't tell us what they are.
No.
We'll hear about them later. In fact,
Give me a secret.
just as you were speaking, I thought you should have been giving the sermon today, because you're saying some of the things that I shall say in a few moments. But we want to say how much we all, those of us who know your work and know you, how much we really admire what you are doing and what you've done for yourself, for your family here, and for many of the men and women, some of whom I know within the Burundara Stroke Group and within our support group and within others support groups as well. It really is a marvellous piece of work.
24 stroke support groups in Victoria.
24.
Yes.
And you've had a major part in getting those stroke groups functioning, and I've been part of a few of them as well, and so I've seen the work you do, and I really am proud to be associated with you. Would you thank you for today?